One. What's up, party people? It's your host, Sunny Ray, and today we're on the Building on Bitcoin show, and I'm interviewing George. George, how's it going, bud?
I'm doing great. Doing
Are
great,
you
Sam. Thanks
where
for
in the
having me.
world are you right now?
I'm in downtown Toronto currently.
Downtown Toronto. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, I think today we're gonna probably dive deep into like the El Salvador story, given your kind of experience there. We're
Yeah,
gonna talk about maybe Toronto as well, my home turf. And but before any of that, like I was telling you before, is I like to start with the man, the behind the plan here. So
sure.
what's your story? Where you originally from? Are you from Toronto? And how did that look before you got into Bitcoin?
Born and raised here in Toronto. Yeah, pretty boring in that front. Basically just came up here and I got into crypto sort of later in the game compared to some folks that you may be interviewing. I've been in the space since 2020, at least professionally. And but prior to that, my background, sort of jumped around a bit. I used to be in the automotive industry. Out of school, I worked at Tesla for a couple of
No
years.
way.
Yeah,
Cool. That's
back
pretty
in
interesting.
yeah, it was back in 2015. So it was certainly still a big company at that point, post IPO and a global brand. However, back in those days, it wasn't quite a household name yet. I would say certainly not to the extent that it is today. But that's sort of where I cut my teeth, a little bit in the sales side and technology, and then I transitioned from there into actually a family related investment business. My father's a private investor. He's invested in the capital markets and across multiple sectors for 40 plus years. And after working at Tesla for a couple of years, I decided to leave, and I was fortunate enough to benefit from some employee options and that kind of thing that put me in a position to actually be able to work with him and co-invest in my own small way and work under him, which is actually how I ended up getting into to Bitcoin and Satstreet and everything that I do today. Um, but yeah, happy to transition to
So,
that.
so, so,
Questions?
I mean, I'm just curious about the Tesla side of things,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Elon, right? He's arguably well, he's the wealthiest guy, but he's also the most innovative, creative, like, popping out billion-dollar companies like it's nobody's business. What on earth was that environment like to work, for the man? Like
Well, I will say I didn't work directly for
sure,
Elon.
of course.
I was, Tesla's headquarters are in California. I was specifically on the sales side here in Canada. I helped, roll out a few of the stores here. We launched, when I joined, it was just the Model S initially, and then we came out with the Model X and the Model 3 eventually. And I left just as the Model 3 sort of launched, the mass market vehicle. But yeah, to work for a company like Tesla, it's certainly a environment of sort of disruptive thinkers, obviously very tech heavy, but certainly a startup sort of scrappy environment, even for a big company at the time. It wasn't an easy role. The targets and the expectations top down uh, you know for what they were expecting of us in the Canadian market was quite high. But I enjoyed that environment, and but
And,
yeah,
and George, talk to me about sales a little bit too, right? I mean, in a way, we're all kind of selling, I guess, Bitcoin today. But like, just talk because sales is one of those things that's really interesting for me because it's not something that's like formally taught in university or in schools.
yeah.
Yet it could be arguably one of the most important, if not the most important skill that you need in life. Like, you're
Yeah.
always kind of selling something, but like, how did you even get your head around the concept? Was it just intuitive? Did you read some books? Did you take some courses?
I've read some sales books, but I'm a firm believer that you kind of have to just jump in and make mistakes and learn by doing. I think, yeah, sales is critical. It's involved in everything we do, both professionally to personal relationships. We're always sort of representing ourselves and selling ourselves to some extent, and it's, I think, a critical skill, but it's one that just requires experience. I was pretty green when I jumped in at Tesla. I was the youngest guy, I believe, company wide in the role that I had. And but I think the big thing for me with selling is you're not selling, right? Like I really firmly believed in Tesla and the product that we were pushing. And so when you believe in what you're selling, it's I think some folks they can get into a selling role and you know and think that they're pushing or their job is to promote a product or get it across that. But if you believe in what you're selling, you're just sort of sharing your genuine perspective or excitement about something. And that was the case for Teslas. I really believe in the technology. I enjoyed that. I'm a bit of a contrarian, so I enjoyed the fact that Teslas were very misunderstood, and that actually sort of ties into Bitcoin too. In that, when I was sort of promote or selling Teslas, uh, a lot of the populace thought electric cars had already failed. They don't work. Where do you plug them in? Their performance. They're not as good as internal combustion. So I found it very exciting and rewarding, kind of shifting people's minds and having those sorts of interesting conversations, and then sort of proving to them that their worldview is actually wrong on something like, in this case, the electric car. And now for me, it's Bitcoin, which is more of a financial angle, but it's a similar thing where people come at it with these ideas, and they're often largely wrong or slightly misinformed or missing a bit of the picture. So yeah, sales is critical, obviously, in everything that you do, but I never felt that I was selling something. I felt that I was just sort of, uh, you know, just promoting something that I was genuinely passionate about, and
Mm.
I got excited, getting other people excited about it.
So tell me before, I guess, joining, Mike on the Satstreet journey, and then by the way, I want to spend a lot of time talking about Satstreet and, El Salvador. But again, like I
Yeah.
said, I'm very curious about you. So what was your kind of understanding of the financial system or just technology at large, or centralized institutions prior to getting into Bitcoin?
Well, so like I mentioned, my father, a successful entrepreneur, investor, across multiple sectors. That was a home I grew up in, right? And so, beyond, the schooling side where I did an automotive business program, and then working at Tesla, it's sort of somewhat been in my blood and in our household growing up. And then eventually working with him, more so in sort of the private investment side. And the way that we got personally involved in Bitcoin was actually through the lens of us having concern about our own portfolio in the sort of context of the broader macro environment back in sort of 2019, 2020, going into COVID. And so the way that we actually fell into Bitcoin, because, you know, we had heard of it, certainly back in the 2017 sort of cycle and boom. Um, but it's sort of a classic thing that you'll hear from folks, especially in the investment business, is they'll say things like, well, I don't invest in things I don't understand, right? And so and we were, big, we would regurgitate that line to folks when they'd come to us about Bitcoin, but we never really took it uh, serious enough, I think. And then we eventually came to the conclusion that we got to look into this thing and understand it. So we came to it from the lens or, uh, I guess from the perspective of more of a tradfi mindset. For example, we were big gold investors, believers in gold, investors in junior mining companies. And I know that sort of somewhat ties into what you do, Sonny, um, but we just sort of came to the conclusion that here's this asset that's not going away. We don't really understand it. We better go speak to someone who does. And to tie into this sort of Mike Nasser piece, where does one go, right, to learn about Bitcoin? Well, you can go down YouTube rabbit holes. You can listen to podcasts. That's actually an easier venue these days than it was, say, maybe 5, 6 years ago. So what we did is we just looked up the largest exchange where you could buy Bitcoin in Canada. Um, we found it was CoinSquare. We reached out to them. We got put in touch with Mike Nasser, who was running the OTC arm of CoinSquare, and he sort of took us down the educational path and road and got us comfortable. And we ultimately, made an investment in Bitcoin. And it didn't take us long because we understood sort of say the characteristics of sound money like gold, and then being able to make that comparison to Bitcoin and quickly realize that it improves on essentially every single one of those characteristics. So it sort of clicked in, I think, relatively quick for us as sort of gold guys. But
Can you expound upon that just a little bit? Like, what are those characteristics? I mean, I kind of know, obviously, but just I figure a
yeah,
lot of new people are listening to this, and given it's a Bitcoin show, I'd love for you to kind of just double click on that gold Bitcoin relationship.
yeah, well, gold, one of the reasons why it's been such a store of value over thousands of years, there's lots of reasons, but basically there's characteristics of sound money, right? There's five or six, I forget exactly what, but there's scarcity. So obviously, what is the supply of the asset? Gold is relatively scarce. There's currently about 2% increase in its supply, from mining. However, gold's supply, or its new supply on an annual basis, is predicated on how profitable it is to mine that gold, right? So theoretically, as gold's value goes up, the available gold that's mineable on Earth, will continue to grow. So in theory, gold's say its total supply that could exist is much greater than maybe what's currently being mined on an annual basis. And Bitcoin, as an example, fixed at 21 million, solved that problem. And then there's is it? How recognizable is it? And so when you go into all these different sort of characteristics, so divisibility, gold can be, melted down into coinage. But, if you wanted to use it for small purchases, like buying a pack of gum, you're not going to, sprinkle gold dust. And limitations to how divisible it is, Bitcoin divisible by 100 million units, right? How easy is it to transport, right? Well, gold largely sitting in vaults all over the world and managed via global ledgers. But if you do want to move large amounts of gold globally, it requires, extensive, just sort of impractical elements, like you'll have to put it on a ship. It'll be very expensive to move it across borders. You'll need security, et cetera. Whereas with Bitcoin, obviously, global ledger, global monetary network, I can transfer Bitcoin anywhere on Earth essentially instantly, whether worth a Bitcoin or $1 billion. So from that sense, in terms of how scalable it is, and how accessible it is for transactions, far greater than something like gold. Recognizability. Well, gold obviously, pretty recognizable. However, it can be counterfeited, it can be faked. And then to go through the process of validating whether how pure the gold is, it's again, you can do it, but it's not the easiest thing to do. Whereas with something like Bitcoin, again, it's a global blockchain. Everyone around the world can see verify whether that Bitcoin is there, and just sort of tackle all of these key fundamental characteristics of what makes something sound money. And you can apply those the same sort of characteristics to, say, something like fiat, where again, you can hold it to the same sort of standards, and Bitcoin excels in each of them relative to fiat. The only one of these characteristics that Bitcoin, I guess, technically lacks in is track record. Gold's been around for thousands of years. Fiat has been used, yeah, for many decades around the world, and certainly in North America, a system that's, I think we can argue, is clearly failing. But Bitcoin is relatively new, and so it's funny because the way that I look at it is from that perspective. Therein lies the opportunity, because it excels in all these other characteristics, compared to gold or fiat or any other form of money or monetary technology. But the only one it's lacking in is track record, and that's actually the area that people get, I think, the most stuck on, is they have no experience with it, hasn't been around that long. But once you sort of go down the, say, the rabbit hole, as we all call it, and you become convinced that Bitcoin's not going away, you realize that track record is only going to get longer. People's comfort in that lacking area is going to essentially reduce over time. And when people become convinced or realize this, it's only going to draw more people to the asset. So yeah, it's, I guess, going compared to gold, there's lots of different things. I don't think gold is going away. We still, on a personal level, I own gold. Our family owns gold. I always say I don't think that the gold community and the Bitcoin community should be at odds, which they sometimes can be. I think there's a lot of overlap in our, how we view the world, frankly, and why an asset like Bitcoin or gold is so important. Um, but yeah, I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. But I do think Bitcoin's going to win the day eventually.
Cool. I like that. I like that a lot. Hey, so I love how you described kind of like the characteristics, building up the thesis for Bitcoin around like kind of the first principles. But
Hmm.
tell me, again, before Bitcoin, were there any like societal or financial, like kind of global challenges that you, maybe your father, your family saw that Bitcoin addressed?
Well, yeah. Well, there's no question that it's actually I think a really important point in let's say in Canada and the U.S., Western countries, where we've got relatively sophisticated financial systems, markets that are efficient, and you know, again, very far from perfect. We've had bank failures, financial crises, etc. But our day to day, our credit cards work, our cash works. Yeah, it's inflating away, etc. But for most people, it's not really on their radar as an immediate pain point. They can get around the world using the existing infrastructure. But I think, yeah, this is a really important part about Bitcoin, is there's lots of places in the world where that's not the case, right? These sort of folks that don't have access to sound banking infrastructure, access to a currency that's not debasing at warp speed. This represents hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people in sort of this developing world that don't have access to these things, or, for example, corrupt governments, right? The over the last several years, I've really woken up to that, to the realization that we're not much better than a lot of the places in the world that we thought we were from a corruption standpoint. Um, but again, at least we can, for now, go to the bank and save some money, invest in stocks, and so on. A lot of the world can't do that. So Bitcoin, enables these underdeveloped economies, and populations to have access to a monetary tool and participate in a global economy. And that's not small. And then the other piece is, and this is critical to that being, actually possible, is you don't need intermediaries with Bitcoin, right? You don't need a bank that you can trust. You don't need a government to stand behind your fiat currency. And you just need access to the internet, I suppose. And I guess technically you don't in some cases. But from a practical perspective, we need the internet up and running for Bitcoin to really flourish. But yeah, if you've got access to the internet, which a lot of the world does, you've got, going back to Elon, guys that are literally putting up satellites around the world. And so in a few years, more so than already is the case today, everyone's going to have access to internet. And as long as they have access to a mobile phone, which a lot of the world does as well, smartphones have come down in price so significantly that, and they're accessible. You know, folks can participate in the Bitcoin network, save money, participate in the global economy, and in theory, it can really be the technology that could lift the world up out of poverty as a result. So yeah, I think we get stuck on in North America, as Bitcoin being sort of a speculative investment, almost like a stock, right? And we sort of forget, and everyone says, "Oh, there's no intrinsic value to Bitcoin." We forget that it's an incredible tool, an empowering financial tool. It's not just a number that goes up and down all day that you can maybe trade and make a bit of money, or more likely if you're trading lose. But yeah, it's much more than just speculation.
And George, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it not true that Tesla bought a bunch of Bitcoin back in the day and
Yeah,
they still hold it, correct?
yeah. Well, it's funny. I haven't looked at. I know they had to sell it a bit a year or so ago, or they did. Um, but yeah, Bitcoin actually, or Tesla rather, uh, accepted Bitcoin as a form of payment. I think this was back in 2021 or something, 2022. Forgive me if my dates are wrong, but yeah, Elon, he owns it personally. He owns it, I think, on Tesla's balance sheet. I believe SpaceX's treasury. Again, don't quote me, but he's clearly a Bitcoiner. And yeah, so there is overlap, right, between that, at least in my background. But admittedly, that wasn't a factor into why I got into Tesla, or why I ultimately transitioned to Bitcoin. But
Well, all roads lead to Bitcoin.
all roads lead to Bitcoin.
That's one of my favorite sayings. One of my new favorite sayings is you can just do things. It seems like that's like a common theme between all the people I interview as well. It's like, oh, I just realized one day that I can just do things.
Yeah.
Hey, um, so tell me, what was there like a defining kind of moment then for you? I mean, you've touched on a lot of it in terms of like kind of coming at it from the gold perspective. Your father obviously had a big influence in your way of thinking. You were working at Teslas of the world. You got connected to Mike. But was there like literally a moment? I mean, for some people it's a moment, for some people it's more of like a gradual kind of phase
Well,
type of thing where you were just like, yes, like I'm
okay.
going all
So
in. I'm dedicating my life to this thing.
yeah, so through going, down the rabbit hole for our own family's investment
Hmm.
purposes, and sort of recognizing the broader concern that we had, and seeing, oh my God, Bitcoin actually is as a solution to the sort of, I guess I shouldn't swear on this podcast, but the terrible situation we find ourselves in globally. So after meeting Mike and kind of getting comfortable making an investment, um, and this sort of transitions into how I ended up in the space full time. Mike, knowing that we invest in early stage companies and founders and so on, not just in, say, the junior mining and gold world, as I said, but also technology and different things. He said, "Hey, I'm actually thinking about uh, starting my own company with my partner John Lister." And John, by the way, super brilliant guy, had previously sold his last company to CoinSquare in an all equity deal, rolled into their team, met Mike, and the two of them sort of realized they complement each other. And hey, why don't we go and build our own desk? All the while, Mike had met my dad and I, and said, "Hey, would you guys take a look at our business idea?" And so at this point, I was convinced on Bitcoin. He'd taken us down the rabbit hole. I was, but I didn't really have a pathway to make it a full time, a career choice. And then it kind of fell in my lap. Mike reached out. Hey, do you want to take a look at this? We met with Mike and John at our office, and immediately were so impressed that we were prepared to write the first check for the company. And then so we did. And a few months after Satstreet launched, Mike reached out and said, "Hey man, do you want to join us and help build this out on the sort of business development sales side?" And which is again what my background essentially was, and what I brought from Tesla. And I said, "Hell yeah, I would love to join you guys." So for me, it was sort of two pronged. I got to join, um, you know, two very impressive entrepreneurs that I would love to work for anyways. And then it's also in this sort of disruptive space, in this misunderstood technology, that I get to go out there and change people's minds and help sort of build out in Canada. So that's what we did, right? And just so the audience knows kind of what the goal of Satstreet was, um, we really wanted to build a venue for sort of high value, high net worth individuals, corporations, to engage the space, to invest in a way that they're sort of accustomed to, right? So if you're going to be sending large amounts of money to an exchange, or being able to speak with someone, I know that was very important for my dad and I. But having a desk that that sort of white glove, and very much reminiscent of, say, private banking kind of experience. We thought that would be a really effective way of bridging in sort of the higher value clients in Canada. So that's what we did. We rolled out Satstreet, and I joined a few months in, and over the last, I guess, almost 5 years now, we've crossed about almost 3.5 billion in transactions across the desk. We're at spot OTC liquidity, so we're not too fancy in what we offer, no derivatives and things like this. We're a very low risk company from that regard, but we're an excellent venue for folks that are looking to engage the space. We lean on education, and ultimately we can facilitate very large transactions. So anywhere from 25,000 to 100 million plus is kind of the spectrum of transaction sizes. And yeah, so it's been a phenomenal run for us, and for me to be able to watch it grow from the ground floor. And it's been an incredible ride.
So that's awesome. I mean, to go from idea to three
Yeah,
and a half billion dollars with a B, impressive. Yeah. In fact, I remember meeting with Mike in those early days, and he was thinking of launching like a wallet, like a Bitcoin wallet solution of
yeah,
sorts. And I remember talking to him being like, dude, I don't know if that's gonna make all that much money. And around that time, he pivoted more towards this OTC solution. And look, you guys have found product market fit, obviously. And yeah, people talk about you all the time. So talk to me about El Salvador. So I mean, how did that even come about? I heard you're mostly stationed there nowadays. I
uh,
think your father moved out there. Like, what's going on? I mean, yesterday I think the president, he wants to
yeah,
be called President B or something now, Bukele,
yeah.
Bitcoin, and he
Well,
met with the man, right, Trump, and people are excited. So these are exciting times. So for people who don't know what's going on in El Salvador, maybe give us a bit of a primer on that.
sure. So yeah, as I mentioned, I've been sort of focused on, or we have been focused on Canada as our primary market, for almost 5 years. However, during those, say, the last few years, we did see a number of our clients beginning to move out of the country. Certainly during the sort of political uh, shit show, if you will, that we sort of found ourselves in over the last several years. So, in order for us to continue to service those clients, we had to set up a subsidiary in a new jurisdiction, that had a regulatory framework that would enable us to go into these newer jurisdictions that some of our clients were leaving to. My father was actually one of those clients, and someone of his sort of profile. It was a very common occurrence that we were seeing. Guys were leaving the country. And so in order for us to be able to service them, we set up this subsidiary. And initially, we were servicing BVI, Cayman, Bahamas, like you name it, we could do it as long as it wasn't the US, funny enough. And so my father, again, as a sort of tie there, he initially went to Panama. Okay. And we had lots of clients that were doing that. And that's a sort of common story I think people, have heard. But when Bukele came out, and this was back in 2021 at the Bitcoin conference that I was at with Mike, actually. And when they announced that they were making Bitcoin legal tender, I got on the phone with my dad, and I said, "Hey, Dad, you see what you hear about what just happened? And he said, no. I said, well, Bukele just made, or El Salvador just made Bitcoin legal tender. So he actually immediately hung up the phone, started reaching out to, whoever he could down there. He booked a trip, and it was supposed to be a week or something. And he basically never left, is sort of the long and short of it, right? He fell in love with the country and the opportunity and the trajectory and so on. He was very early, I would say, relative to, now Bukele's in the White House meeting the president. But the reason I'm painting that is because while Satstreet was already sort of expanding to service, our existing clientele that were leaving, and then eventually growing that side of the business out organically as well, because lots of companies were leaving the US and setting up offshore anyways because of regulatory pressure. My father was sort of boots on ground in El Salvador, and he started to bump into folks that were having issues, Bitcoiners moving large amounts of capital into the country, particularly for things like real estate transactions or investment properties, because while Bitcoin was made legal tender. And while, there's a sort of Bitcoin beach microeconomy where, you're seeing folks actually using it as a form of a medium of exchange, there was still a large percentage of the country that would require dollars to get anything done. And so there wasn't really a desk, in that region that could successfully move large amounts of, say, Bitcoin into dollars and get it into the local banking system. So he would, reach out to me and say, "Hey, George, ran into this guy. He's looking to buy, a piece of property here. He's a Bitcoiner, but he's having whatever." So we stepped in and started helping out with the odd transaction in El Salvador. And so I started going down to check it out myself. And every visit I would make to El Salvador, I would leave more convinced that this isn't some little blip, short term, sort of experiment that might not work out. I became more convinced, almost like Bitcoin, that it's not going away. El Salvador is not going away, and its growth trajectory is not slowing; it's speeding up. And I would compare it to, coming back here and seeing the same road being built for 10 years in Toronto. Every time I'd go back to El Salvador, in those, even to this day, a road all of a sudden pops up, a building pops up. Like the infrastructure growth is incredible. So what started off as the odd sort of transaction and our specialty in facilitating those high volume transactions, and we could add a lot of value quickly, it became apparent that there's a much bigger need and a much larger opportunity in the country as a whole. So we decided to open up a platform there. And over the last, I guess, over a year, we've been sort of building out our platform. And actually, we just recently got approval under the sort of the CNAD licensing, which is the local digital asset license and regulatory body. So yeah, we're set up in El Salvador now, and we're excited to help the country grow and help large money move in from the Bitcoin community into El Salvador, and also help folks that are looking to buy Bitcoin locally in larger amounts. As the economy continues to grow, there's going to be more and more need for a desk that can help facilitate those sorts of transactions. So, yeah.
And so I guess, working in the Bitcoin space, how has Satstreet's focus on El Salvador deepened your kind of like personal connection to the Bitcoin tech stack and everything? Like, is it, because I mean, it's like Bitcoin is legal tender, WTF? Like, I still can't, like, I mean, now we're on to the United States considering, putting it on as a strategic reserve asset. I mean, things are moving so fast, but yeah, just seeing like a country leader adopt it in that kind of way. What did that do for your own kind of personal conviction?
Well, it's to me, it's a tell, right? When you've got a country that makes such a bold sort of decision like that, it sort of signals that whoever's behind the wheel there is pretty disruptive disruptive thinker. And it also signaled to me that, yeah, now the sort of game theory or the first domino of global adoption has begun. And so, now admittedly, seeing it go from El Salvador to the US, I expected a few others in between. but but hey, I'll take it, right? Um, but yeah, like there's no question, Bukele led the way here, and he was the first guy to come out and boldly accept Bitcoin, welcome it into the fabric of their country, and while there's lots of other things he's done, say locally to help facilitate growth, like eliminating the crime situation, the gangs, and putting in maybe incentive structures for businesses to come in and open up shop. Fundamentally, that the big decision he made that put a major spotlight on El Salvador was Bitcoin, and I don't think it's lost on other countries the incredible turnaround and how Bitcoin fundamentally played a role in that. So yeah, I'm excited to see now, obviously the US, but there's so many more to come, right? And again, therein lies the opportunity of how early it still is.
Mm,
Um, you
mm.
know, we're still so early on the adoption side, and we're just starting to see major countries create strategic reserves. We're just starting to see major companies add Bitcoin to their balance sheet, maybe via ETFs, which would be better if they were just buying physical Bitcoin, if you will. But it's all directed, it's all attached, it's all connected, and
All
uh,
roads lead to Bitcoin.
all roads lead to Bitcoin. And yeah, and it's really exciting to see it, and it's just getting started. I think that's the real piece here that with the conversations that I have with sort of high net worth individuals or companies that are thinking about adding to their balance sheet, they look at it like it's a stock chart and they see how it's near all time highs, or at least it was, and they kind of it freaks them out a bit. They don't like to chase shiny objects in the markets, right? But Bitcoin is so unique in its properties, and there's so much capital that theoretically should continue to flow into it, and in all likelihood will. That when you zoom out, it's just still so early. So, anyways, yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces to what's driving it, but it's
Y-
to me it's all
y-
positive.
George, as I was saying, so before I got into Bitcoin, I spent almost 10 years in robotics. So I had a chance to, interface with like some of the smartest like professors all around the world. And then after I got into Bitcoin, like you're surrounded by like these super like high IQ individuals all the time.
Yeah,
But there's one word that I find is perhaps in more short supply than Bitcoin, which is courage.
yeah,
Yeah. Because it takes a certain somebody, right, to really like whether it be yourself and making that leap and joining Mike in those early days, whether it be Bukele and kind of like taking that leap on behalf of a nation state, whether it be, Trump now with maybe Elon's blessing a little bit on seeing the light. But can you by the way, I'm quite confident that you cut open Bukele and he's bleeding orange, right? The guy is like a hardcore Bitcoiner. Do you
yeah.
know much about him, like his background? Like how did that even happen? Like it seems like a bit of an anomaly.
Okay, well, Bitcoin Beach is sort of ground zero. So a gentleman named Mike Peterson, and Martin or Roman Martinez, or Chimbera as his nickname goes, two gentlemen that helped roll out sort of the early Bitcoin, um, you know, micro economy, if you will. And there was it's got this sort of mysterious origin story like Bitcoin does, where we don't know who Satoshi is. Uh, El Salvador and the early days of Bitcoin Beach, there was a anonymous donor that provided the Bitcoin Beach community with basically a float of Bitcoin that they were given to almost as an experiment to see, hey, can we get a local economy like that's impoverished and relative, well, no technical background, or capability, and can we educate them into accepting Bitcoin, using Bitcoin, saving their money in Bitcoin, exchanging services for Bitcoin. And Mike Peterson and Chimbera were two gentlemen that ran this sort of charity, and rolled it out, and it was successful, right? They went literally door knocking, educating locals on setting up a Bitcoin wallet, and then giving them a small amount of Bitcoin, with the one requirement that they didn't just sell it for dollars, right? They had to use it, they had to exchange in it, and so on. So it was this sort of little experiment, and it was successful. And I think it started to get to the ears of Bukele, that was already moving up in the sort of political landscape. And he's a bold guy, and he decided, and he's open-minded, and he decided to look at this sort of little experiment, and saw how incredible it was, and decided to roll it out in a bigger in
Oh,
a bigger scale.
so this experiment preceded his orange pilling.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow. Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. I did not know that. Okay.
yeah.
Cool. That's very cool.
And yeah, there there were people, the Jack Mahlers and different types, that were coming in and helping. So there was, I think, it was certainly a combination of things, all sort of converging to the same point, which is Bukele and Bitcoin. But I think he could look down and see in his own country an example of it working, and empowering his one of these small communities. And then you also have these other voices coming in, and helping sort of steer him maybe towards the decision. But do I know what ultimately was the light bulb moment for Bukele, where he decided he's going to push the Bitcoin button nationwide? No, but that was certainly the genesis moment.
Do you think Max and Stacy had a hand in that, or did they
Of course,
come into the picture more later on?
of course, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
They,
cool. Yeah, no, I was actually at Max
they,
and were you there? I'm trying to remember. I saw Mike. You were there as well. No, I saw
the
John.
the Bitcoin
Yeah, were
golf
you there?
tournament.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
golf thing. Yeah, yeah. So that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of
yeah.
fun. That was a really cool vibe.
Max and Stacy, huge, obviously hugely impactful in the rollout of Bitcoin in El Salvador. And frankly, without them, it wouldn't have happened as quickly. Or so they've been great advocates for the country as well. And that's the other thing, is there's the Bitcoin side, and then there's sort of really making people feel comfortable to go down to El Salvador and check it out. And without people like Max and Stacy and others to sort of from the world that a lot of these people came from, and saying, look, we moved down here, we're Bitcoiners, come check it out. And that alone has helped usher in a lot of folks. So
Yeah, big fan of their work. So tell me, what are you guys doing at Satstreet? That kind of ties to Bitcoin and to El Salvador's like economic transformation. Are you guys, besides obviously like building the core of your business and whatnot, are you guys also involved in some of this like economic transformation? Are you, I mean,
well, again, for an economy to grow and to scale, there needs to be an avenue for large amounts of money to flow through. And there needs
mm,
to be this sort of pipes, if you will, to allow money B2B move in size, and on and off ramp from the digital asset world back into the fiat system, and vice versa. So we we are moving in to help bolster those rails, and provide a pathway for very large transactions to flow in and out of the country using Bitcoin, and moving in and out of the fiat system. So that's our primary role. Is, again, if a Bitcoiner from, who knows, anywhere in the world wants to come in and start investing in the country, and they need a pathway to dollars on the ground, or to get that Bitcoin into dollars, we can help facilitate that, work with them getting it into the banking system, dealing with the banks down there. And then vice versa. If there's, and this is a growing trend in El Salvador, is you're starting to see, sort of the local, uh, say high net worth individuals, or those that are at the higher end of uh, the economic spectrum in El Salvador specifically, that are looking to buy Bitcoin. Companies that are opening up in El Salvador, et cetera, they're looking at it to their treasury, and so we can be that bridge as well. So that's the main.
What was the big? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, you finish up.
Well, the main piece of what we're doing again is, and it's what we do in Canada. We're replicating what we've done successfully in Canada and then building it out in El Salvador.
And what
So
was the biggest challenge in doing that?
in rolling out in El Salvador,
Yeah.
well, to be honest with you, there wasn't many challenges because it's actually one of the more refreshing things about doing business in El Salvador is, unlike in Canada, right, where you're dealing with somewhat hostile regulatory attitudes. Banks have no interest in dealing with digital assets, at least currently. So it's always an uphill battle in Canada, right? And that's true also in the US, right? You talk to any crypto company, regulatory banking, it's a nightmare, right? Operation Choke Point 2.0 in the US, right? Where crypto companies literally can't open bank accounts. You go down there and it's the opposite. You have a government that is trying to welcome businesses, that has accepted Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin community. They want to work with you to help, facilitate you coming into the country and setting up shop, but also while doing it, with a, not let anybody in that, so there's certainly a level of significant regulatory oversight, which we really appreciated and gave us great comfort in El Salvador. But there, just whether it's public or private sector, there's this feeling of how do we help each other, and that I've never experienced. And it's certainly not like that up here. Up here, it's cutthroat, competition, da da da. You go down there, and it's how do we work
Mm.
with you? How do we get this through? The government will step in and actually get involved and help move things along. And there's just this real entrepreneurial kind of spirit across the board. And it's not just Bitcoin, right? It's you can close your eyes and throw a dart into any sort of sector or part of the economy in El Salvador, and there's massive opportunity. And you've got an environment where you can, where they'll work with you to help sort of see through your vision. So it's super refreshing. So yeah, honestly, not really a challenge.
And not only did Bukele get the Bitcoin thing right, he also somehow sidestepped a lot of the noise, I guess you could call it, in our industry, right? I mean, they've got like this laser focus on Bitcoin, which some could argue that the US maybe haven't gotten the notice on. Like they're kind of spreading themselves thin, looking at other things as well. But like, yeah, anyway, maybe not no question in there, but I just found that fascinating.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I agree, but again, it's I think first in, best dressed, and Bitcoin was first in and best dressed, and he's got Bitcoiners around him, and so I think that helps shape his perspective, right? Like it's sort of classic to come into this space, Bitcoin's the gateway, and then people get kind of sucked into the allure of altcoins
Yeah,
and
what's the next Bitcoin? My
what's the
my
next, right?
least
And then we
favorite
always end up
question.
coming back to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like Haley skipped the mistakes part, right? Because he had people around him that had either already made them and helped steer him away from it, or he just had such a great fundamental understanding on Bitcoin and saw through the rest of the ecosystem and some of the
Uh,
risks.
so I know most of your client bases are like obviously uber wealthy people. I
Hmm.
think you said the average transaction size was a couple 100,000.
Hmm.
But just curious, but given that you're in El Salvador, there's this concept, right, of what they call financial inclusion,
Hmm.
right? Maybe not necessarily your client
Well,
base struggling with that factor, but just curious, how do you see Bitcoin playing a role, given again that you're in El Salvador on the ground?
yeah, well, okay. As a business, yeah, we wouldn't we service sort of the higher value
Yep.
transactions, you understand, but we can support local companies that support smaller transactions, right? We provide liquidity to other companies on the ground and so on. So we, from a B2B perspective, we support companies that are frankly doing what we're not doing. which is interesting. Now, in terms of the financial inclusion element of Bitcoin, it's what I said initially. It enables folks to begin to save an asset and have access to an asset and literacy in understanding how to use an asset that is continually growing. So it's empowering. I think there's for the first time folks in sort of the sort of lower end of the economic spectrum are realizing that unlike say dollars that sort of come in and out, they actually want to save some of their wealth because they see Bitcoin growing in value, and I think there's an understanding there. So yeah, I think there are countries beyond El Salvador that probably need it more, frankly. That from an inclusion perspective, right? Like El Salvador already has a stable government. They've got a relatively stable currency, which is dollars. Um, but I think they're the first example of a small country with low economic you know prospects turning things around. And Bitcoin was a key feature to that. So
Cool, man. Well, I think we're kind of getting to the end of the time. I had a bunch more questions lined up. Maybe we can do like a part two down the line sometime.
yeah,
George, this has been fascinating. I got to learn quite a bit about, your viewpoint, and it's so heartwarming. The interview I did prior to this one, like an hour ago, was with one of the guys leading the charge in India. Sort of
uh,
like zap from like, India now to El Salvador, talk about Canada. It's been awesome. So land the plane for us. Maybe tell us a little bit in terms of where people can learn more about Satstreet, Twitter handles, whatever you want, or maybe share some wise words of wisdom in part here.
well, geez, I don't know if I've got much wisdom, but yeah, reach out to us. You can go to our website, satstreet.com. You can email me. My email is george@satstreet.com. I'm always happy to chat. If you have questions about whether it's Bitcoin, a big part of what we do is educational, sort of the 101s, the principles of BTC, all the way up to facilitating an investment. Or if it's El Salvador and you're just curious to hear what's it like down there, what are the opportunities? Not even just in say Bitcoin specifically, but in other sectors or other areas of the economy down there. Happy to chat and happy to open up my network down there. As I mentioned, it's an entrepreneurial place, and everyone wants to help each other. So it'd be my pleasure to make introductions if there's someone that you want to get in to see and something you're interested in doing. So yeah, reach.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, George. Thank you for your time. And yeah, let's bring this one to a close.
Okay, thanks, Sunny.
All right.
Appreciate you
Cheers.
having me on. Bye.